Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of It's Time. Today, Lindsley and I are joined by the amazing Dr. Joy Hussain. She is a physician. She has gotten her PhD, and she is studying what is emerging almost as a new field in thermoregulation and really how, in particular and specifically, how heat and sauna impact our physiology, impact our health span, with a special interest in how this is different for women. So she provides some amazing insights, but just to remind everybody that science is young in this field and changing, and a lot of these things haven't been proven yet. And so you're going to hear us talk of kind of back and forth and saying a lot of times we think this is what's happening. But again, the science hasn't really been done in humans. It's an up and coming field. And so it's hard to commit to a certain algorithm, or my least favorite word, a certain protocol for some of these issues. And so we invite you to listen with an open mind as we really discuss what we know and what we think we know, what we are hypothesizing might be happening, and what really still needs further investigation. So this is a delightful conversation where we really do dive into some new areas, both for myself, for Lindsley, and Dr. Joy Hussain really opens our eyes to how we can use sauna and maybe who should not be using sauna. So thanks for listening in. We hope you enjoy this episode, and we'll talk to you soon. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to It's Time. Lindsley and I are so excited for you to join us today. Before we get started, we have a really, really exciting announcement. This week, Prosper, who brings you It's Time every week, is announcing their new subscription platform called Prosper Together. We are so excited to share this community with all of you. It's where we go much deeper in the areas that we talk about on the podcast. We provide strategies for living your best life now and expanding your health span later. We host forums. We have a community center where we can answer all of your questions. So please check out our new website at www.weprosper.co and join our community Prosper Together today. Now, today on It's Time, we are so excited to introduce you to Dr. Joy Hussain. Dr. Hussain started out as a general practitioner, and then, like many of us, developed an interest in an area that was definitely underserved. And we can't wait for her to share her journey with all of you and to dive into how, as midlife women, we can expand this concept of thermoflexibility and what that means for all of us, and how we can really use it to optimize ourselves and feel better through this time of life.
Yes. Well, thank you. It's really nice to be here. A little bit background on my journey is that I grew up in San Diego, so warm climate, never even thought about a sauna. Maybe on a ski trip, went into a sauna as a teenager a few times, but I did suffer from a condition called Raynaud's phenomenon. And so any kind of cold or stress would trigger kind of really the tiny capillaries in my fingers would close up, and they turn blue and white and then really painfully red when it reperfuses. And I'd always dealt with it, and I was always a big exerciser. So I always thought, oh, it's just something genetic I have to deal with. And then when I was training in medicine, doing my family medicine training, I got a posting in Alaska and decided to work as a family doctor there for a number of years. But in the back of my mind, I was like, oh no, my Raynaud's is going to go crazy. But once I got there, I actually ended up staying a lot longer than the 2 years I signed up for, stayed there for 5 years, and my Raynaud's was the best ever. And again, didn't think too much about it. I thought maybe it was healthier food. You know, there's no McDonald's in Haines, Alaska, this small town I was at. But what my husband and I at the time were doing a lot is sauning, because that was how we got through, winters. And everyone had a sauna, and we have kind of potlucks around saunas every, most a few nights a week. And again, I didn't put it together until I moved to Australia in Alice Springs, one of the hottest places on the planet, and my Raynaud's came back. And that's when I went, oh, that's weird. What is going on there? Again, I still didn't put it together until we moved to a cooler part of Australia, Melbourne, Australia. And my husband and I were missing saunas socially. So we built a sauna. Within 2 weeks of using the sauna, my Raynaud's went away again. And that's when I went, Oh, this is interesting. This is not, and I've tried all kinds of medicines for it, calcium channel blockers. I've tried nitro paste when I ski. Sauna is so much more profoundly effective than any of those things.
Interesting.
So and about that time, I met Professor Mark Cohen and realized I really was interested in following this through. I wanted to know because when I looked online, it was like, there was nothing about using sauna almost medicinally like that.
Yeah. Hmm.
And that's what launched me into doing a PhD, which I finished in 2021. And that's where I am now. I'm trying to add more research findings to this, to applying this type of, I think, unique lifestyle tool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Jen and I are both big proponents of sauna. And so, we're, naturally biased to be fans of it. But I also have Raynaud. So that's really interesting. I'm going to start trying to pay attention a little bit because I haven't really noticed it since
Why do you
quite a
like the
while.
sauna? I'm always curious. So why are you big proponents of sauna? What have you found?
Well, I started getting interested in the research around sauna for the longevity and almost as like an insurance policy and thinking about it in the longevity world. And it's also whenever we're looking at things, Jen and I frame that as what is effective with research and then how easy or accessible is the tool. And so for me, sauna is got a ton of data and research behind it, but it's also quite accessible because we have one and it's enjoyable. So we'll talk maybe in a little bit in about cold and hot together, but sauna is something that is really fundamentally an enjoyable experience. So the idea that it's also beneficial makes it an easy one to go do.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Something you said I want to unpack there. You said there's tons of research, and you're right, there is, but it's sprinkled in all these different disciplines that often don't talk to each other. And that's one of the big findings I found in my PhD.
Yes, and I don't think much of the research, especially when I was first learning about it, was really focused on women and midlife women, like all the research studies out there, right? It just wasn't there was not a carve
Definitely.
out. So I think
Definitely.
Dr. Jen and I are super excited to hear about that target that you've got as well around women and how
Yeah.
heat plays.
And you're highlighting one of my major findings is all these tons of research have been done on men. And really women are always an afterthought. And I do get it. As a researcher and as a practitioner, we're more complicated with our thermoregulation. Our female hormones are very intertwined with thermoregulation. It's no accident we get hot flushes. Thermoregulation goes haywire when you take away one of its key building blocks, and estrogen is so key to our smooth thermoregulation. It's all happening in the hypothalamus.
Yes. So let's back up there and let's take our listeners kind of through that progression and kind of how our bodies are designed to work. And then then we can kind of say, and then because we're designed this way, then when this happens and things start to go haywire, we end up with these symptoms because then I think it's going to make a lot more sense about why sauna is such an effective tool if we kind of understand that. So do you mind taking us through that?
Sure, let's back up and think about it. It's difficult. Well, first of all, I have to frame it as it's difficult because sauna is a lot like exercise. It is a multi organ, multi system, multicellular activator. And so, us humans, we like to simplify it and get it to maybe one, maybe three things. Guess what? Sauna, there's hundreds, probably thousands of little switches going on and off with our genes when we're in a sauna. And these switches are slightly different for different types of sauna. So even let's stop and talk about sauna. What does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
Sauna, comes from Finnish, and it really means a hot box. So exposing your whole body to hot air, and how that air is heated determines how much moisture or humidity is in it. So a hot moist sauna, which we sometimes call wet saunas or say a steam sauna, very different activations than say a dry hot sauna. So something like you think of an infrared sauna or a Finnish sauna where they don't pour a lot of water over the rocks. Those are examples of dry sauna. Now, I ended up having to choose a side when I was doing my PhD, and I went more for the dry sauna because that's what I had more experience with. And that's where most of the research has been on a lot of Finnish style saunas. We're starting to study steam saunas a little bit more. But this ties in. I'm explaining all this because it ties into what is happening to our body in the sauna.
Yeah.
So let's start with the dry sauna.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? So when we say dry sauna, does that include infrared?
Yes, that's what
And
I mean.
then
Infrared sauna is a
and
type
then
of dry sauna.
and if you go into a non-infrared, a more traditional dry sauna, and you put water on the rocks, does that become a wet sauna or does that still a dry sauna?
Great question. It becomes a wet sauna for a few seconds and then it goes back to dry sauna. But that's so good to ask that question, because that's what divides a lot of sauna researchers. Is that's not a true sauna because you don't throw water over. The Finns will argue a lot about that's not a true sauna, an infrared sauna. I argue no. Overall, I think an infrared sauna and a dry sauna, as long as you're not pouring water over it constantly, they're very similar
Okay.
in their actions on our body.
And then there's a heat level difference, right? So like in a non-infrared sauna, your dry sauna has to get to a certain heat level to be effective. Is that right?
Well, yes and no. And this is where there's lots of controversy. And this is where a lot of the findings coming out are actually challenging that. So, no, I think, look, there are practices, the cultural practices around these different saunas are different. So, yes, sometimes we're comparing apples to a different type of apple when we're looking at that. But I think overall, so the Finns tend to run their dry saunas at about 80 to 90 degrees Celsius, which would be about like 170, 180 degrees Fahrenheit. Whereas someone like a Russian banya sauna, which tends to be a little more steamy too, they can sometimes run it quite a bit higher, 90 to 100 sometimes, but they're throwing that water over the sauna a lot. Whereas an infrared sauna, most of the studies and most of the people I talk to tend to run at lower temperatures, 60 to 70. And that has to do with the limitations of infrared, the technology of how it's heating the air. Because remember, all these heat sources are heating the air, and the infrared sauna is interesting because it also heats bodies, objects too. So it's a different technology of heating. But I definitely think a lot of the benefits can be similar, but there's differences, and we'll get into that with different
Perfect.
populations and things.
Perfect.
But getting back to, so what's happening in a dry sauna? So first of all, we're sensing this heat in our skin. It's sending nerve messages to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is the key gland that is secreting hormones and coordinates thermoregulation in general. And then it's sending out messages to our heart and telling the heart to beat faster. And it shifts our circulation away from the core to getting it to the extremity. So getting it to our arms and legs where there's more surface area, and we can start to do something called sweating, which is another really under-researched phenomenon in medicine. I mean, sweating is so key to our health. And sweating is what cools us. But how sweat cools us is we produce this sweat, which is predominantly a water base, but there's so much more than just water and salt on our sweat. That's a whole separate topic. But anyway, you produce this sweat, and it is specifically designed to evaporate. And this is where there's differences, because in a dry sauna, yes, it can evaporate. And so you keep sweating. In a wet sauna or in a jacuzzi or somewhere where you are not able to evaporate that sweat off your body surface, then it actually reduces sweating. And it's a phenomenon called hydromyosis. And it's when our skin is too water saturated, it can evaporate. So that creates a big difference. And there's been some good Polish researchers who have demonstrated in both men and women, they've been very equivocal about it, that a wet sauna or going into these saunas that have, say, a relative humidity greater than, say, 70 or 80, 60 to 80% humidity, it is a huger load on our thermoregulation because we can't sweat. And sweat is how us human beings, that's our major way of cooling down. And we're a unique mammal like that. And again, it's something that it's our superpower as a human being. All other mammals sweat differently. So there's other mammals that sweat. Say, you can think of horses, you see sweat on them, or dogs sometimes sweat. Cats, you never see very much sweat. Their sweat content is completely different. They rely more on breathing. They pant and they drink lots of water to cool down. Us, it's predominantly I mean, over 90% of our thermoregulation is through sweating. So you take away that 90% and you heat up in the core really quickly. And that's why I think about a steam sauna. You can only stay in there about 5 or 10 minutes, even the really most conditioned, and they got to come out and have a break because they
Hmm.
got to sweat. They got to go somewhere where that sweat can suddenly evaporate. And a lot of people argue with me. They're like, oh no, I'm sweating a lot in that steam sauna. You should see me. I'm covered. I'm like, you're covered. And there's been some German scientists who've done elegant studies showing, no, what's on your skin is coming from the air.
Right.
And they use like, they really, it was so funny. This Zek it was two Zek scientists in Germany, maybe about 10 years ago. They did this thing where they tagged the hydrogen and oxygen with molecular tags. I mean, I don't know how they got the funding for this.
Oh, wow.
They really elegantly showed, oh no, that's what's happening in a hot sweat, in a hot steamy sauna.
So, how does estrogen play into this for women? So, when we're cycling, before we're in perimenopause, how does sauna work then? And how does that change as we start to experience symptoms of perimenopause and things
Okay.
like hot flushes and things
Yeah.
like
All
that?
right. Well, we're
And then
shifting
post.
into an
Yeah.
evidence-free zone. So I can tell you my opinion about what's going on.
Perfect.
There hasn't been enough studies. In fact, I've talked with other gynecological researchers, and it's like, there's the evidence for this. But here's what we think. So thinking about our cycling, so in that first cycle after you have your period, when you start your period, and then for those kind of couple weeks after, you're in what's called the follicular phase. And that, like Dr. Mindy Pelz does a great thing about calling it the power phase. And no question of it, when estrogen is at higher levels during the follicular phase, body temperatures in everyone tends to be about a degree lower. And in fact, think about old-fashioned rhythm method. How did we figure out when we were ovulating? We used thermoregulation. We would take our temperature every day, and when the temperature went up at ovulation and then stayed up, that's your luteal phase. That's your progesterone dominant phase.
Mm-hmm.
Estrogen is what keeps the cap on. It keeps us cooler. Lets us more, the circulation go more. That's why, and progesterone, think about it. It's one of the big hormones that's dominant in pregnancy, progesterone. And think about when you talk to 80% of women who are pregnant, what do they feel? They feel hotter. A lot of them talk about getting hot flushes. I know I felt that when I was pregnant too. So that's where estrogen plays a role. And so it's not surprising that we get hot flushes when our estrogen levels drop, because suddenly we don't have that top, the lid on it. And we start to get these moments of flushing and getting that, not having the cooling effect that estrogen has. Progesterone, on the other hand, is more involved with keeping that circulation out. That's why it's more your restorative phase. It's getting your uterus ready for that pregnancy if a zygote happens to land there and find fertile ground. So that's kind of in a nutshell, but that's super simplified, and we haven't done all the studies we need to do to really tease that out. What's happening? And I think it's happening at the level of the hypothalamus. So the hormones that are involved in regulating how estrogen gets released. Because when you think about estrogens in the ovaries, but it's those hormones coming from your, what we call the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. It's those hormones, those higher hormones that are really hard. It's hard to stick a needle into these glands and get those levels of those hormones.
But
So that's how
does it mean that the efficacy of sauna therapy is different in perimenopause or postmenopause, or how do we translate that to the impact of sauna?
Great question. And that's one of my research questions, because I actually suspect, again, I'm in this evidence-free zone, but I suspect sauna is more efficacious in women than in men. I mean, men, so their testosterone levels tend to be much more level day to day, week to week, month to month. Yes, there's decline as they get older in some, but nothing like our cycles, our monthly cycles, where I think our thermoregulation is our estrogen and progesterone levels and testosterone levels are fluctuating more. But this is another theory of mine, is that in our comfort crisis now, which I think is the title of a great book that
Yeah.
points
Yes,
out that
we've read it. Yeah,
the
we've great
minute
book.
we get cold, we're turning on the
Yeah.
heat. The minute
Yeah.
we get hot, we're turning on the air conditioning. And as a result, we're not using these pathways to thermoregulate. Think about it. We've demonized sweat. Most of us are like, oh my gosh, I can smell your sweat. Oh, don't drip on me. There's really culturally, at least I can only speak from our culture, my culture that I grew up in, but there's such a demonizing of sweat. And so many more women come to me wanting to turn off their sweat glands than wanting to promote their sweating, or at least not until recently. So I think we're not using those pathways, and we know in our body, you don't use something, you lose it. And I think that's what's happening, is that as we're hitting perimenopause, we've had these decades where we haven't used that system, and you suddenly take a big building block of that system away, and that system goes, I'm not coping. I'm not going to cope anymore. And then this ties in really well to another finding I found in my research, that sauna really improves sleep. And that's something that we really haven't studied well yet. And it's because I think we're still trying to get our head around, well, what happens in sleep?
Right.
With these new wearables, that's another research interest of mine, is I
Mm.
want to study what's happening in sleep. Because when you ask women in perimenopause who have terrible hot flushes, or what we call vasomotor symptoms, what's their number one problem is they can't sleep. It wakes them up at night. And that's another way that I think maybe sauna might be helping. Maybe not just the estrogen hypothesis, but also this hypothesis of helping us go to sleep.
And do you think the sleep help? And then I want to just quickly re-summarize everything we've said because there's been a lot packed in here. Do you think the sleep is bringing that blood to the surface like you described? So when you get in your sleep environment, you're cooling down faster? Or is it actually improving quality over the duration of the night of sleep, not just that latency and falling asleep?
Well, again, we're in that evidence-free zone, but the evidence we do have is that for good sleep onset, no question of it, when we do sleep studies and
Yeah.
things, people's blood, actually 2 hours before you go to sleep, you start to have hormones that, and again, hypothalamus is where it's at, that start to reduce your activity, which reduces your core body temperature, and you start to cool down. So that's just normally, just typically. Most of us, to get with good sleep onset, we cool down by a full degree or more 2 hours before. And then once we're actually asleep, that further reduces muscle use, and we really go into more of that more latent state, more cooler state.
Yeah.
Now, how does sauna help? Well, that's fascinating. I think because when you poll people, again, it's anecdotes that help give me ideas about what's going on. But a lot of people tell me, yeah, as long as I sauna fairly close, like 2 to 3 hours before bedtime, it helps my sleep. Others would say, well, actually, it can interfere with my sleep. If it's maybe too hot, if they get into the sauna too close to bedtime and maybe get too hot. Again, this is maybes. This is a lot of conjecture, but I do think there's something going on. And I think it's brain, it's hypothalamus. And hypothalamus is what controls all these sleep onset changes. And what are we talking about that happens in the sauna? It's again, hypothalamus is the key thermoregulation
Yeah.
coordinating organ.
Well, there's definitely, I mean, Jen and I both wear an Aura ring, and there's definitely data in Aura that says
I gotcha.
the sauna. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the trend lines, right? It's that there's enough data on it now that says sauna helps on sleep
Yes.
latency, and also HRV. At least Aura
Yes.
says
Well,
that when you
let's
tag.
unpack
Yeah.
HRV, heart rate variability. That's our major heart related finding about the autonomic nervous system. So this is, where is the autonomic nervous system coordinated? It starts in the hypothalamus. So all of this is, you're right. It's definitely proving that.
Well, so if you know if midlife women are listening to us and they're like, okay, I'm interested in sauna, like can we simplify two things? One is like, here are the researched benefits on sauna, just so that they know the rationale, like why they should care. And then secondly, what's the practice? Like how many minutes, at what kind of heat, how many times a day, what time of day? I mean, how many times a week, what time of day? Like, are there some guidelines or rules of thumb that you would share with women?
Well, I'm actually writing a book about that right now
Awesome.
because it is so complicated. And it's like if you replace everything you said with sauna with exercise, that gives you a sense of the complexity of the answer. And it's very individualized. So,
Okay.
really, I think coming up with the best sauna protocol for your individual health is going to require, I think, consultation in the future. This is the future I dream of, a consultation with either a sauna physiologist, maybe, or maybe exercise physiologist will take on thermal therapy, is what I'm going to call it. But I think there's a lot of different factors. And just to give you a sense, we've talked about the difference between men and women, those hormones and how they affect habit. So definitely, I think we should be catering our sauna protocols to differently for men and women. And with women, again, I'm in this evidence-free zone, but I think we should be saunaing more rigorously during our power phase, during our high estrogen level phase, challenging that low body temperature, and maybe less so in our luteal phase or in our higher temperature phase.
So how does that transfer to women who are menopause? Like they're out of that cycling.
Well, when they're out of that, then it frees up, I think, when you can do it. And it depends. So many women that are, quote, in menopause, a lot of us are taking menopausal hormonal therapy. So are we truly in menopause? A lot of us are taking control and giving ourselves
Yes. Yeah.
estrogen. So
Definitely.
it might be around dosing your estrogen. There's all these variables that are totally unexplored that I'm dying to explore.
Super
But
interesting.
great questions. These are the type
Yeah.
of things. Another thing is if you are someone who is prone to depression or have been on antidepressants, we know it impacts thermoregulation too. There's some great work coming out of UCSF, Ashley Mason, and a lot of her colleagues are showing that they did this big wearable. I don't know if they used an Aura, they used some sort of wearable where they looked at, I think, over 2,000, almost 2,000 people, men and women, and then had them fill out questionnaires, watch their body temperature, monitor their body temperature for, I think it was weeks or maybe months, and noticed that those that admitted to having mild depression or had higher body temperatures, statistically higher body temperatures. But again, that magic 1 degree or so. But 1 degree doesn't sound like much, but it's big when you're looking at physiology. It really changes what goes on, all these switches that are going on in your body based on where you're at your body temperature. So if someone has, say, chronic fatigue syndrome or depression or any of these conditions where we've done some sauna studies and know they can't tolerate the high heat, I'm going to switch them more towards trying something that's gentler. Maybe like an infrared sauna, maybe set lower. Like there's I believe it was a Korean study that looked at a group of women, I think 20, that had chronic fatigue syndrome. And they were doing an infrared sauna intervention and they started at 60 degrees, the one that's the most studied. They couldn't tolerate it. So they had to change midway to 40 degrees. And suddenly all the women tolerated it really well. It was all women too. Did really well. And suddenly they documented some really good effects on their mental wellness. So these are the type of factors, kind of like an exercise protocol. Someone with chronic fatigue syndrome, you're not going to tell them to go run a half marathon. There's different ways of, and that we have to start to explore. It's going to take time, experience, as well as the research
Hmm.
to.
Interesting. So I want to take it just a second to kind of recap what we've covered, because I think we've covered a lot and I think it's pretty deep. And not to oversimplify, I just want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. So then to make sure our listeners are understanding correctly. So master temperature control for our bodies is in our hypothalamus.
To our understanding.
To our understanding.
To
Present
our
day.
understanding. Yeah, they've isolated to certain parts, but this is bringing up a really, sorry, I keep introducing other
No.
variables, but a lot of that work's done on mice
Right.
and hamsters and
Right.
rats. When's the last time you saw your mouse run into the sauna? No. They do, again, their thermoregulation is completely different. And that's one of my big criticisms when I was doing my PhD. A lot of studies I had to throw out because I'm like, no, we're not going to look at it in hamsters. It's not being comparable enough. And that's what's hard, is that we are unique in how we thermoregulate, and that's made it difficult to study.
Yeah, for sure.
So yes, based on mostly animal studies, there are some human studies, but very, very few compared to all the animal studies. Yeah, it's through the
Okay.
hypothalamus.
So then we have, as women, we have our fluctuation in hormones where estrogen cools us, progesterone heats us up.
Yeah.
So as we can imagine, when we get into perimenopause and those are going wacky, we have temperature instability.
Right. And yes, and they have definitely shown that temperature instability, at least is the hot flushes, those vasomotor are associated with drops in estrogen level, not increases, but drops.
So
But
as
during perimenopause, we're doing this.
So as we're on this hormonal roller coaster with peaks and valleys, we're experiencing a lot of temperature instability. We know that when we get in the sauna and trigger all of these things, it's helping to normalize that a little bit. And then it's also having all of these great effects on other body systems. And I want to point this out because this is one of Lindsley and I's big things to talk about when, we get so stuck in perimenopause and menopause just being about our hormones and very isolated body systems, and it really affects our whole body. And so I just want to bring that to full light with sauna too, that we're talking about cardiovascular fitness and cardiovascular health. We're talking about neurocognitive health with sauna use and its benefits there. We're talking about treating different types of chronic disease, with chronic fatigue syndrome, depression, all of these things that are all related, which all happen to get more complicated when we go through our hormonal roller coaster of perimenopause as well. And so sauna is another tool we can be starting to consider to use to help balance out a lot of these things, because just like our estrogen and progesterone that hit all of these different body systems, sauna can help in all of those ways as well.
In fact, I think it makes it easier when you again make this analogy between sauna and exercise. In fact, one of my last clinical trials, I looked at just women, and I directly compared infrared sauna experiences to moderate intensity exercise. And I chose moderate intensity exercise because that's the type of heart rate, blood pressure changes that are simulated as moderate intensity exercise. But I found some key differences. And those key differences, I think, are where it can be beneficial for women. So one of the key differences is when you get into an infrared sauna, and I was looking at infrared sauna set at 60 degrees, and I was looking at healthy women that didn't have any of these issues, had fairly regular periods too during that time. They were premenopausal. And what I found is that the core body temperature, so I was looking at it with tympanic temperature readings, so that's the eardrum doing the ear one. I found that women had higher core body temperatures, again, that more than a full degree, compared to when they were on the exercise bike. I used an indoor exercise bike and checked everything. So their core body temperature was higher. Their skin temperature, peripheral skin temperature, was higher too. So when they were exercising, they were sweating and cooling. Whereas when they were in the infrared sauna, they were sweating but staying warm. That your skin temperatures were staying hot. And I looked at forearms, forehead, and the back. And then the big one that I think we need to just grasp hold of is that you breathe faster. You have to breathe faster when you're exercising because you need to get that oxygen. You need more oxygen. You're having higher oxygen consumption. Whereas in a sauna, you don't have that.
Thank you. It's time for spending your time with us and diving deep into the world of sauna with us with Dr. Hussain. So just again, to remind everyone, please consult your healthcare provider before starting a sauna regimen, especially if you have conditions like high blood pressure, any cardiovascular problems with your heart or your lungs, and some metabolic diseases, just to make sure that sauna is a safe option for you. And again, as a reminder, as you start your sauna practice, that we need to really compare it to exercise. So we all are starting at different levels of fitness, and we want to enhance, as we're going to use Dr. Hussain's new word, our thermo-flexibility. But with that, we have to create our sauna fitness levels as well. And so again, this is a process that we build over time, and we're not likely, if we haven't been involved in a sauna practice, jumping into a full heat finish sauna for the amount of time that you're often hearing on the internet and in the media may not be safe for you. So start slow, start low, listen to your body, have a conversation with your healthcare provider so you can reap all the benefits of sauna, especially as midlife women. Take care.